Welcome back to Creative Excuses, where we make excuses to be creative out of the video games that we play. We are back with another build video, one that I've been promising for months and just never delivered. The ultimate Dragonknight. This build is super fun, spamming ults on a PvE Dragonknight, which allows it to almost effortlessly clear even some veteran DLC dungeons like Falkreath Hold. Stick around to hear more. Remember though, this video is not a guide for the sets, skills, or any of that. For the guide, check the video description where you'll find a link to the build on Outcast's build editor on esohub.com. Instead, for the rest of this video, I am going to walk you through the problems that I ran into while trying to make the ultimate Dragonknight. And how I solved those problems. Before we jump in though, go ahead and hit that like button for more fun build videos like this one. It really helps the channel out and gives me that sweet algorithm juice. Also, if you ever want to hang out or chat about my builds or videos, I live stream over on twitch.tv/creativeexcuses. Right now, on Wednesdays, my wife and I are almost through with the Halo Master Chief Collection and we'll be starting something new soon. And then on Thursdays and Sundays, I play ESO, mostly making and testing builds, banging my head against a wall, soloing dungeons, sometimes without a HUD and making cinematics, and hosting a dragon hunting event every week. I'd love to see you there. All right, let's jump into it. To start talking about this build, I have to take you all the way back to when I first made this character almost 2 years ago. I made a Dragonknight after watching one of Hack the Minotaur's old Firebrand hybrid Dragonknight build videos. I thought the idea of a hybrid at the time was awesome, and I really liked the idea of a big flaming sword and just smacking crap. So that's what I tried to do. I power leveled up to level 50, doing some quests and whatnot, and a lot of daily dungeons I think, and then once I hit 50, I went to work on the build. I had a few concepts in mind for the build at the time. I really wanted this to be the ultimate Dragonknight. At the time, that really meant I wanted to live into every single one of the Magicka Dragonknight's themes. For me, these themes are the obvious fire-breathing dragon vibe, the massive heavy attack buff from the flaming sword idea, and the iconic Dragonknight leap. I really wanted to live into these themes, so I made the build that followed them. The sets that I used back then were some of my favorites, but nowadays I really see that those sets just aren't great. To begin, I picked up the Shulk exoskeleton set, thinking that minor heroism was freaking sick. Then, when I realized playing a Nord with a two-handed weapon on a Magicka Dragonknight was terrible sustain, I started using the Queen's Elegance set. Queen's Elegance benefited my stamina heavy attacks a lot, adding quite a lot of flat damage, because back in the day it used to buff your damage, your next direct damage attack after a heavy attack. Now it just gives him power. But when I was light weaving abilities before going back to heavy attacks, it gave me some really good cost reduction. The build was functional. I could clear Veteran Falkreath Grotto 1 without much issue other than hand pain from holding down heavy attack for that hour that it took me with my pitiful damage. Fast forward through like a year and a half of build growth on other characters, and I still hadn't cleared Vet Vatashran with that early version of the build. So I took a look at my theming and I decided to cut it back. This is where I started leaning into the pun of ultimate. Before, I was trying to heavy attack, generate ultimate quickly, and use Dragonknight Leap a lot. But I didn't lean into any one thing strong enough to make it work well. It worked, but not well. So I went back to the drawing board. But by then, I knew what the problems were, and I had 3 of them. After so much trial and so many errors with the previous version of the build, and especially the hand pain from heavy attacking, I decided I wanted to lean into the ultimate generation side of the build. So I started to research. Luckily, I knew this was part of the theme for my Dragonknight way back when I made the character, so I was already a Nord, which has ultimate generation as its sustain-related passive. So, step 1 was already done. Step 2, though, was to find some sets that would generate the most possible ultimate. For this, we have several options. Let's go through them and see how much ultimate per minute they generate at most. Man, that was a lot to go through. So these are all of our options. Most of these sets have pretty terrible 2 to 4 piece bonuses, however, which is a problem for a solo build. What I ended up settling on then were 2 sets which I knew would generate the most consistent ultimate for me. Hide of the Werewolf and Eye of the Grasp, which would add a combined maximum of 156 ultimate per minute to the build. With base regen, these 2 sets, and the Nord passive, I was sitting at 366 ult per minute, which was quite strong. That works out to about 6.1 ult per second, or roughly double the base regen, which is 3 per second. However, by using the correct Dragonknight skills and getting kills with a Fighter's Guild ability on my bar, I was regularly sitting at 6.5 to 7 ult per second, or around 400 ult per minute. That is a lot of ultimate. But I wasn't done. Dragonknights like using status effects too, so I looked at Baron Zodris and the recent charged trait buff and thought I could push it higher. So I tried it out, and it sucked. Baron Zodris without Force Pulse, even with a charged, 2-handed front bar and lots of skills going off, was only generating about 40 ult per minute. So I skipped it, it just wasn't worth it. Bloodspawn here would be a really strong option too, but at the time I didn't have it, and it didn't look like it would be consistent enough in some single target fights where you're not taking several hits per second. Then Oakensoul was announced with its beautiful 100% uptime on Major Heroism, and I fell in love. As soon as High Isle dropped, I farmed out Oakensoul in the first 2 days and slapped it on this Dragonknight. I cleared Vet Falkreath Hold with it the same day. With Major Heroism, Eye of the Grasp, Hide of the Werewolf, the Nord passive, the occasional kill with a Fighter's Guild ability on my bar, and the decisive trait on my 1 bar, I was sitting at 9 ult per second, or 540 ultimate per minute. When I felt like spending the money, I'd pop Heroism potions and go up to 10 ultimate per second, or 600 per minute. All of that combined is 3 times the base ultimate regen. And this isn't theoretical either. This is in content, single target, or AoE. That I hit 10 ultimate generation per second. This is the ultimate Dragonknight. And that's a lot of ultimate spam. Don't worry, we'll talk about the Oakensoul Nerf soon. Time to back up again. The second problem was damage. I was playing a Magicka Dragonknight on a Nord without a source of major breach in solo content. That was terrible. At the time, Dragonknights had just been buffed, but I wasn't really feeling it yet. Eye of the Grasp and Hide of the Werewolf have better offensive stats than most of the other sets on that big list that I read out before. But the stats aren't great together. One gives stamina, the other gives magicka. Eye of the Grasp only gives 1 crit bonus, and Hide of the Werewolf has a health bonus on it. Basically, all of that was working against me dealing any sort of reasonable damage. So I decided to make a change. I dropped the magicka focus and switched to being a stamina Dragonknight. The main reason I hadn't done this before was that Noxious Breath is just a disgusting ability to me. You just run up to something and puke on it, and it deals damage. I much prefer the Fire Breath thematically, so I tried my best to keep it. But it just wasn't in the cards if I wanted to be the ultimate Dragonknight. So the first thing I did was switch over to Noxious Breath. Then I added in a spammable. This was a tough choice. Early on, I was still using Ring of the Pale Order, but I decided to try not to rely on it so heavily. So I switched to Carve, which had just been buffed. That, however, did not work. It was okay, but it didn't really have a big enough shield for me, so I gave in and used Brawler, an ability I had avoided before for the same reason I was now avoiding the Ring of the Pale Order, because it's just such a strong soloing ability. But it worked. Brawler gave me a huge shield and dealt plenty of damage. Once I had Noxious Breath and Brawler going, the rest of the build was just getting some other decent dots going. I used Flames of Oblivion on the front bar, and then I threw a Maelstrom 2-hander on the back bar with Molten Armaments and Eruption for minor brutality. Then I tossed on my favorite monster set, Prior Thieric. Prior Thieric was not the best monster set, but I loved the way it looked, and the added damage from it really wasn't terrible. Stormfist would have been significantly better though. However, I was still using the Dragonknight Leap as my main ultimate, and it just wasn't cutting it. The Leap is cheap and deals good burst damage in PvP. It also comes with a juicy damage shield, but it just wasn't needed with Brawler and my other healing sources. So I started looking for other ults. Before Oakensoul, I used Flawless Dawnbreaker on the front bar and Magma Shell on the back bar. Don't ask about Magma Shell. It is worse in every way for a solo Dragonknight than corrosive armor, except for the aesthetic. My main ult though was Flawless Dawnbreaker. With the amount of ultimate generation the build was putting out, before Oakensoul mind you, I could keep 100% uptime on the Dawnbreaker's 300 extra weapon and spell damage buff. And then at the end of the fight, I would get my dots up and pop a Magma Shell and execute the boss. It was really fun, honestly. Then Oakensoul came out. I swapped Magma Shell for corrosive armor, and now I use that as my primary ultimate. Now I have 100% penetration with the ult ready to pop every 20 seconds. I still use most of my other abilities from the 2-bar version too. Brawler deals great AoE damage while keeping me tanky when the ult is down. Noxious Breath gives me a great damage over time and extra penetration when the ultimate is down. I added in Burning Embers as a strong single target dot and heal after the hybridization changes. And finally, I keep around Eruption for the free Minor Brutality buff, the strong AoE dot, and the extra stamina sustain. I will admit that damage on the build is still not great, but the combination of these skills is strong enough to get you through Solo Vet Hard Mode Falkreath Hold, and probably some other Solo Vet DLC dungeons too. As long as there's not a DPS check, you might be able to make it through it with this. The final major problem was healing. As you saw a minute ago though, this problem was solved at the same time as the damage problem. Early on, when I was still a heavy attack build, struggling to settle on a specific identity, I used the fact that you can cancel a heavy attack with an ability, and the fact that I was heavy attacking with a stamina weapon to use Bone Shield after every attack. This was back long before DK healing was buffed and long before the hybridization changes. Suffice it to say though, that was a crap solution to healing. Every ability cast of Bone Shield was a wasted global cooldown where a damage skill could have been cast, or where a properly scaled healing ability could have been cast. Fast forward to the Oakensoul build, the current, fully updated Ultimate Dragonknight, and healing was primarily taken care of by 3 skills in the early version of the build. The first and most obvious is Brawler. Brawler is crazy. The base shield on this, using the Bastion champion point node, is 8k. Then if you hit just one enemy, that shield value goes up to 12k. Brawler is by far the strongest damage shield ability in the game. You get good damage and a massive shield if you have just one target to hit. If you have 2 targets to hit, or multiple targets, it goes up to a 24,000 damage shield on this build. That literally doubles my health. It's overpowered. But if I get hit through that shield, which often happens in vet content, I still need some healing behind it to make sure my health is topped up. That's where the next 2 skills come in. One of those is the very nice Burning Embers, which heals you for 100% of its damage done, and it deals a lot of damage. It was just nerfed, literally cut in half, and then sorta buffed back, but then the damage was nerfed, so it's confusing, but basically, it's still really good. Apply it to multiple enemies or just one enemy and brawl away. You'll stay pretty healthy. To stay very healthy, I started using the Wreathing Blows champion point slottable. It heals you for 7% of your direct damage, and that just means that those brawls, or every one of your light attacks, or the burst damage from Noxious Breath, they all heal you a little bit. This keeps me very healthy and topped up. The last big healing tool is just popping an ultimate with the Battle Roar passive. 200 ultimate is like a 10k burst heal and a 10k of each resource. It's insane. Not to mention, if you're using corrosive armor, you'll also become almost invincible when you pop the ult. There are many mechanics in the game that just deal damage, and they're not oblivion damage, they're not typeless, they are mitigatable using corrosive armor. There are of course mechanics that can't be mitigated using corrosive armor. Now, I said I'd talk about the Oakensoul Nerf. When I originally wrote this script during Update 34, the High Isle patch, Oakensoul had major heroism, which has now been nerfed down to minor heroism. Earlier, I said I can generate 10 ultimate per second in content, and I wish that was still true. I can't though. Not anymore. Major Heroism added an extra 120 ultimate per minute before the decisive trait, and an average of 144 ultimate per minute after the decisive trait. Without Major Heroism, and without access to Major Heroism, all of that ultimate is going away on the build. There just isn't a way for me to get access to it without sacrificing another source of ultimate. So I'm going back down to 7 to 8 ultimate per second in content, which is still insanely strong. I honestly thought that without Major Heroism, this Dragonknight wouldn't be able to clear Veteran Falkreath Hold as easily anymore. But it turns out 7 to 8 ult per second is still just enough to pull out a corrosive armor every time you need it on the 4th boss in order to skip the cleansing mechanic, which is the worst mechanic to do solo. That is by far the hardest mechanic to do solo. That means there is plenty of ultimate generation on this build. So don't worry, this thing is still worth playing. It is super tanky, it is super powerful, it doesn't deal a lot of damage, but that doesn't matter because it brawls so well. So there it is, everyone, the ultimate Dragonknight. It doesn't deal the most damage out there, but its insane ultimate generation lets you cast corrosive armor all day long, or any ultimate you want, which may let you do some crazy things like ignore several one-shot kind of mechanics in some veteran dungeons. It's a great build. I am quite pleased that this build was not an Update 35 victim. Alright everyone, thanks for watching this far into the video. Since you're already here, you clearly liked it, so why don't you just drop a little like down there, it helps a ton. And while you're there, drop a comment telling me what kind of builds you would like to see. I have a few more in the works that are mostly ready to go, but I always like new projects to work on, and Theorycraft 4, which of course prevents me from editing videos and getting these out in a timely manner, but you know, we'll deal with that. With that, I'll see you all in the next excuse.
My father, Jarl Skjoromor, is dead. But Falkreath lives another day.